This now brings us to our first topic, which is AI innovations and regulatory frameworks for Europe. And I'm happy to hand over to our moderator, Lorenzo Pupillo. Do we have Lorenzo? Lorenzo is the Associate Senior Research Fellow, and he's the Head of Cybersecurity Initiative at CEPS.
So, good afternoon to everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here, although only online, but that's it, the situation. It's what it is now. And so we will, now in this session, we will look at regulation, AI innovation and regulatory framework in Europe. We will have a very interesting panel, with a different perspective. And I will start, just to warm up the panel and also, to set the stage. I will start presenting some of the work that CEP has done specifically on this issue of AI and security. In particular, we have worked on a task force, a multi-stakeholder task force on AI and cybersecurity for more than 1 year. And we will publish a report. This task force was made by 17 private companies, 8 EU institutions, 2 international organizations, 5 universities, think tanks, and 2 civil society organizations. The goal of this task force was to bring attention to the technical, ethical, market, and governance challenges posed by intersection of AI and cybersecurity. We look at the AI for cybersecurity, but also at the cybersecurity for AI. And we developed some recommendations to ease the adoption of AI in cybersecurity in Europe. What are the basic messages coming out from the task force? First of all, AI applied to cybersecurity is a double-edged sword. From one side, AI can enhance cybersecurity, but from the other side, it poses security and ethical concern. Let's see briefly how artificial intelligence can help security teams. This can be done in 3 ways: improving system robustness, system response, and resilience. System response is the ability of a system to maintain its state, although there are shocking. Okay, so thanks, this can be done to self-testing and self-healing software. Enhanced system responses, the capacity of the system to respond autonomously to attack, identify vulnerabilities in other machines, and generating a response accordingly. Third, the AI can strengthen system resilience, the ability of a system to resist and tolerate an attack by facilitating threat anomaly detection. But if these are the positive aspects, there are also some negative effects. AI has the following effect on cybersecurity landscape. It expands existing threats. Think about, in other words, make stronger the possibility of the current threat. Think about the possibility of working 24 hours a day and the effect that can have on a scale, much bigger scale. Introduce new threats. Think about voice manipulation, deep fake, the possibility of easily breaking CAPTCHA. And it also, this is similarly important, it alters the typical characteristic of a threat. Why is that? Because when we talk about AI, we have not only software, for the algorithm, but also data. And this is a new domain. In other words, data can be attacked, it can be poisoned. Okay, but there are also ethical considerations related to the AI and cybersecurity. Exactly if we go over these 3 specific components. System robustness. There is an issue of control. Who is controlling the AI system? How do we make sure that the system is behaving according to our expectations? System response. There is the issue of responsibility. How do we ascribe responsibility for autonomous response system, machine that will start, to respond autonomously to these attacks? Third, system resilience. Bring about the issue of skills and de-skilling. If we delegate threat detection to machine, how do we make sure that our analysts will still be able to do it? I want just to remember you that now the Navy train the people not only to use the instrument to navigate, but also to use the stars, because, for this issue of keeping, avoiding, the skilling phenomenon to some extent. But there are some important policy issues. Should we trust AI or working towards making AI more reliable? Trust implies delegation, okay? And the issue is that AI, in theory, to be robust, needs to be assessing not the possible perturbation, but this is extremely difficult to do. So this means that although it's important to take into account some delegation robustness, resilience, and response, we need some form of control. They are quite necessary. And we think that control can be assured, among other components, through the following monitoring practices. Companies in-house development of AI application model testing of data, adversarial training between AI systems, parallel and dynamic monitoring or punctual check to AI system through a clone system. Second issue is the human oversight. Assuring human control on AI calls for a level of expertise by human to exercise true control oversight. Such human operators understanding how to approach to different level automation. Third element, I'm just giving you, the basic idea, but there is much more of that. Third element is we look at also openness of research. There is many of these AI model are open source. And this has implied some type of democratization of AI, okay? In other words, almost everybody can have access to AI models now. But the problem is that poor cybersecurity in the protection of these models may lead to hacking opportunities for actors seeking to steal such information. Okay? Now, having said that, we have suggested, a bunch of recommendations. We presented just the most relevant to some extent. Recommendation AI for cybersecurity. First of all, it's very important. Enhance the collaboration between policymakers, technical community, and key corporate representatives as to better investigate, prevent, and mitigate potential malicious use of AI in cybersecurity. Second, enforce and test the security requirement for AI system in public procurement policies. Adherence to ethical and safety principles should be regarded a prerequisite for the procurement of AI application in certain critical sectors. Third, encourage information sharing of cybersecurity relevant data to train models according to shared best practices. Focusing on supporting the reliability of AI by developing a monitoring practice such as company in-house development AI application, models, testing of data, adversarial training between AI system, and parallel and dynamic monitoring. Envisaging appropriate limitation to the full openness policy for research output, such algorithm or model parameter, to enable a more complete assessment of the security risks related to the technology's dissemination, balanced with the EU policy objective of fostering innovation. What about instead recommendation cybersecurity for AI? Strong emphasis on making AI secure, how this should be done, implementing suitability exercise in order to evaluate the related security risks, encouraging companies to address the risks of attacks once the AI systems are implemented. Third, extremely important aspect, AI system following a secure development life cycle, maintaining accountability across the intelligence system by requiring documenting the architecture of the system. Strong measure on AI security, securing logs related to the development, coding of the system, having cybersecurity pedigree for all software libraries, full auditability of models at time point of failure, and crafting an attack incident response plan. These are, the core recommendations that we have made in our task force. And this show you the breadth, of issues related to the this interplay between AI and cybersecurity. Now, after this introduction, I would like to introduce the panel and give the floor to different speakers. The panel, as I mentioned before, is quite diverse. We have Daniel Löwenich from the BSI, the security agency in Germany. We have Bojana Bellamy, President, Center for Information Policy Leadership at the Anthony Williams Law Firm. We have Orestis Trasanidis from the European Institute of Innovation Technology, AI Community Lead. And then we have Carolina Rossini, co-founder, Chief Impact and Partnership Officer, the DataSphere Initiative, and also Professor of Law at Boston University. As you know, the engagement rule, each panelist has about 6-7 minutes. And then we will start the discussion among the panelists and the panelists with the audience. So, Daniel, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo. We at BSI are very much concerned with EU AI, the proposal, and of course with the demands of the industry considering AI standardization.
Yes.
And from that perspective, and with respect to cybersecurity, which is our basic business, please let me give some remarks on the AIA first. First of all, from the cybersecurity angle, the AIA seems to be a clear plaidoyer for horizontal AI standards, which, to our opinion, is the right way to do it. If we consider AIA as the legislative part of the regulation, then the executive part of it should be harmonized standards, harmonized horizontal standards. And secondly, on top of that, we surely need the sectoral standards, but the harmonized standards as described in Article 9 to 15 of the AIA shall be the basis for any kind of evaluating AI products and systems with respect to trustworthiness in terms of the European Commission. And thirdly, well, if you think over it and you have in the demands of the industry, we should concentrate on two types of standards: an evaluation criteria catalog with respect to all kinds of conformity testing, and the corresponding methodology catalog, both being extendable for the progress of the AI techniques. And at least if you have a look on all these, Lorenzo mentioned it, if you have a look on all these embedded AI systems and their requirements, we have to consider within that criteria catalogs, we have to consider the whole supply chain of the AI systems, probably from the infrastructural provider for development to the end customer. And secondly, we have to consider the embedded AI products and systems within other technical products. So keeping in mind that AI is just a module or a component of a technical system, then we have to deal with things like NLF, CSI bridge, and other things. Thank you very much. That's it from my side.
Bojana, President of the Center for Information Policy Leadership at Hunton and Williams. She will take a look at the privacy dimension of the AI Act and touch on how this links to the GDPR review.
Excellent. So thank you very much. It's really very good to be here virtually with everybody who is watching. This has been an interesting conversation. In fact, we heard from the two MEPs already how this regulatory tsunami has been happening in Europe that is following the transformation that our European and other societies are going through, and that is the transformation into digital world. This fourth and fifth industrial revolution are truly galloping ahead, and as a part of that, we are having the regulatory transformation as well. And so the question becomes, how do we think in a more holistic way in these other different areas of regulation? And AI is a great example. We at the Center for Information Policy Leadership have actually been looking for a long time into GDPR, but now we also have to look at the way other data and digital regulation interacts with GDPR, and what does that mean for companies? What does it mean for regulators? And it's not just the AI Act. Equally, we can talk about the DGA, DSA, DMA, e-privacy, the forthcoming Data Act as well. It is really important to consider much more holistically the interaction between these laws, but also what it is that we are trying to achieve. So it isn't always, as Svetlana has said, about preventing risks and addressing challenges. It is also about enabling data to flow through Europe, enabling data to be used and reused, enabling data to be used to develop new AI-based technologies and to allow our businesses to compete and to grow so that we have got European startups becoming tech giants of the future. Now, there are some things that we have looked at, CIPL, with first of all, some tensions that exist in the way AI technology develops and GDPR. And these are very important to understand because as we think about the EU AI Act, we have to make sure that these tensions do not maintain and they do not stay. For example, very importantly, GDPR talks about data minimization, minimizing collection of data, minimizing the retention of data. Now, AI, in fact, works opposite. We need more data in order to ensure accurate algorithms, in order to ensure unbiased and fair and non-discriminatory development of AI. So there is this tension. So we need to make sure that we can actually use data to train AI especially. Of course, and that means we have to understand the trade-off between privacy and fairness. And those of you who are GDPR geeks, you know that fairness is part of GDPR as well. Fairness is part of trustworthy AI. So that's a trade-off that we absolutely must achieve here. And the same with privacy and accuracy. The more data we need, the less likely it's to be inaccurate. But then, of course, the question becomes with privacy. Purpose limitation is another requirement of GDPR, which says data used for one purpose cannot be used for another. Now, in the AI world, those of you who work with AI technology and develop that, in fact, we don't know how technologies are going to be developed and what the uses of AI algorithm may be in the future. So we need to enable this to take place without falling foul of GDPR. Legal basis for processing, again, GDPR says you have to have consent, contract, legitimate interest. But if we actually submit our health data to consent of individuals, there won't be any research. There won't be progress in developing vaccines and treatments against COVID and another virus. It's really important to understand consent, which is so strong in data privacy and control, is actually introducing bias in data sets, right? And so we have to think as lawmakers, but also organizations, how do we do trade-off on this one? And then finally, transparency as well. I mean, how much do we tell people about how algorithms work? I mean, that can hamper safety, security of our systems as well. So there is that trade-off as well between security and explainability, and accuracy and explainability as well. Sometimes in order to make AI more explainable, you actually have to be less accurate in how it actually works, because if it has become too complex, you can't explain it. But surely that can't be right. So as you can see, there are these tensions that we must consider, and I would really hope that this opportunity to look at the AI Act would give us the opportunity to also look how we interpret correctly GDPR and how we ensure GDPR is not a hindrance in developing AI technologies in Europe. The second point I'd like to make is something that, in fact, we have already heard. Svetlana kind of said, we can't duplicate, and Brando said the same, we can't duplicate rules. We have to learn from what we have already. And my point of view is that GDPR has given us really incredible warm-up and exercise and toolkit that we have all been adopting across Europe for the past 2.5 years. It has taught us how to develop accountability, how to do privacy impact assessment, how to understand fairness, how to appoint the right structure and governance. And all of that can be used in delivering accountable, trustworthy, responsible AI. We don't need another AI impact assessment. We have to have companies cannot be asked to do 15 different assessments per different legal requirements. They're going to do one assessment that includes privacy, security, AI, fairness, accountability, and then they will launch the product. So please, let's reuse what we have already. Let's not duplicate. One of the things that GDPR was excellent in doing and needs to be better implemented is the risk-based approach. And I'm delighted to see that picked up in the EU AI Act, and we need to really make the most of it. And what it means is that you cannot label technology high risk. You can label the use of technology high risk, right? So biometric identification could be high risk if it's one-to-many, but it may not be high risk if it's just authenticating me that I'm who I am, so I can enter my hotel room, I can log onto my phone or onto my computer, or even into my workplace. So there really are different ways in which AI is used, and we must enable positive, beneficial uses of AI and really focus on those that would create risks and harms to individuals. Importantly, however, we must not only look at the risks. Any risk assessment must look at the benefits of AI. I was presenting at a session where we were looking at the use of AI environmental protection. And to be frank with you, this is completely new world to me, right? I haven't been looking into that before. And it's fascinating to hear how AI will be used, and including personal data, to actually potentially even predict how much I will be traveling, given I was a big traveler. Probably I'll get all kinds of red marks against my name saying, do not travel that much, you are emitting too much carbon. And why not? And I don't have a problem of using data for those purposes. So it really is important that as we consider AI applications, we don't look at the risks, but we also look at the benefits. What are we trying to achieve by this AI? And equally, if we do not deploy AI, what are we going to lose? What is the reticence risk that we may lose because of not doing this? Third point is to say that the way the EU AI Act is structured, I think calls for more co-regulation and more co-regulatory approach. I do not believe we can set the rules for the future unless these rules are A, principle-based, and 2, outcome-based. We can't tell people how to do that. It's for engineers to do how. For us as policy and lawmakers, it's to tell what kind of outcomes do we want to achieve, and then let the industry and business do that, of course, based on accountability, on engineering, privacy, security by design. As somebody has said to me, big data ethics actually starts with small product decisions, right? In every organization as we are developing these technologies and products. And it really is important that we have got that sort of very neutral, future-proof set of rules. And I think some of the proposals that we are seeing from the Council now are going in that direction. I hope Parliament takes us there as well. Second point on this is that we do need to overlay these rules with organizational accountability. This is something I feel very passionately about. We cannot solve anything by rules on its own, right? We have to have accountable, responsible organizations, including public sector. Very important. They're big users of AI technology. So they are the ones who are responsible to implement and deliver and develop technologies in a way that engenders trust, in a way that it does not create harms, in a way that creates benefits for us all, and inclusion and diversity as well. And I really, I've been delighted to have opportunity to actually work with many organizations to see these emerging practices. In next year, we at CIPL will actually be launching a new project to look very, from practical perspective, what are these emerging best practices that companies are having out there to ensure accountable and trustworthy AI. And some of these things that I'm seeing already is really the tone from the top, the C-suite being aware and overseeing the use and deployment of AI technology. There's been a fantastic blog by Julie Sweet, who is the current CEO of Accenture, where she talks about C-suite playbook on AI. And she talks about this, the need for this to be owned at C-level. And of course, for functional and multidisciplined teams to look into AI, from engineers to lawyers to ethicists, user design experts, and of course those who have got the translating, bridging skills as well. I'm seeing interesting examples of AI oversight bodies, either internally or externally. I'm seeing interesting risk development assessments that take into account wider human rights, as well as algorithmic impact assessment, for example, as well as data privacy. So, companies doing this in a more holistic way. I'm seeing companies developing model cards, those who are creating AI tools, developing model cards for the other companies who are using these AI tools to understand how they can ensure compliance. So this is the beginning of what I think good looks like. So what we would like to see is more nod and nudge in the regulation to these good practices, more incentivization by regulators and policymakers of what good looks like. And final point is that the third aspect of the successful EU AI regulation has to be innovative way to regulate and oversee from regulatory bodies. We cannot have the old-fashioned command and control. I give you the rules, you don't comply, I punish you. That doesn't work here. We absolutely need engagement because these are new uncharted waters where nobody has treaded before, and we need to work together with those who are developing technologies to help us as regulators enforce and oversee these rules. And part of that is Regulatory Sandbox, which I'm delighted to see. CIPL has called and introduced a Regulatory Sandbox in data protection rules. It's been heavily used now by few regulators in EU and outside, but we need to use it for AI as well, and we need to use it across multiple regulators and across country regulators, because we can't have one product going through 5 or 10 or 27 regulatory sandboxes in Europe. We also need policy prototyping, which is another interesting way of checking the impact of policy changes and rules on SMEs, for example. There's been a very interesting project, so-called Open Loop, that has very recently done that in the context of the EU AI Act impact assessments. So these are some of my initial thoughts, and I'm very happy to pick this up in conversation. Lorenzo, thank you.
Okay, Lorenzo. Next we have Orestes Trastanidis, AI lead at EIT. Orestes, welcome.
I would like to thank the organizers for kindly invite me to participate in this interesting discussion. AI, it's a lot of things nowadays, and I would like to shine some light on a business perspective. First, let me introduce you to EIT
Okay,
AI
thank you
community.
very much for your
EIT community
introduction.
because I believe it's extremely interesting in terms of AI. EIT, European Institute of Innovation and Technology, consists of 8 innovation communities which are focusing on different sectors: health, manufacturing, climate change, energy, digital. All of them have joined forces to foster collaboration in education about an uptake of artificial intelligence, breaking the silos of knowledge that hinder the sustainability of AI. And I mentioned this because this element of cross-sectoral collaboration, I strongly believe, is essential for creating also policies and regulation for AI. And I will come back to this shortly, but before, I would like to share with you some numbers in order to analyze better the current situation. We conducted the survey harvesting the opinion of our partners, AI providers, adapters, and investors, including firms, institutions, universities. 80% of the time that right now an AI expert is spending is on preparing and collecting data. The 50% of them believe that the lack of data is a barrier of deploying the AI. And I mention this because we're focusing on AI, but first we need to talk about data. It's always about data when it comes to AI. And I would like to be clear on this. And especially if we think that the EU investment in AI would be approximately 20 billion by 2025, and the 6% will come with private investment. We need to find ways to support this private investment, to support the companies to deploy solutions using this data that it's hard to acquire, but I will come to that again. And regarding the risks of adopting AI, what they told us is that 70% of them believe that cybersecurity issues, regulatory compliance, and violence of personal privacy are causing the biggest risk right now. All of them highlight that we need to build an ecosystem of excellence and trust. And as it's stated in the European Commission white paper and the recent AI Act, EU AI Act, in order to build this human-centric and trustworthy AI made in Europe. The recent EU AI Act gave us the boundaries of AI. Already we discussed about this, and a general framework in order the national committees to start issuing more specific regulations and guidelines. So the challenge for Europe is how to operationalize the principles of the white paper and this act across the diversity of AI technologies, domains of application and deployment scenarios. Just to give an obvious example, there's a stark difference between what is needed for a B2C deployment, targeting end users and leveraging personal data, and the deployment in manufacturing, mostly relying on machine data. So we need to find a balance between a firm data governance, including law and hardening regulation based on the precautionary principle, with intention of not downplaying dangers, and a soft governance, including co-regulation, voluntary self-regulation, as well as marketing mechanisms based on cost-benefit analysis, which will lift regulation barriers, especially for innovators, organizations, and SMEs with B2C or G2C model to create AI solutions. On the other hand, we need to find the balance in the dimension of scope, which ranges from context-dependent and to generic across the board. Already I've heard some things about this. When I'm saying context-dependent means a governance regime with specific approaches and instruments tailored to contextualize sectoral instances for both opportunities and risks. Generic across the board, it means when the same approach and instruments are applied irrespective of contextual and sectoral specificities. Based on those two axes, we identified 4 scenarios. I'm not going to explain them. It's going to be lengthy. Ultra-social, ultra-liberal, utopian, and of course, a dystopian. And all of them have scored differently in terms of innovation, fairness, trust, and growth. And it's important to understand this. It's very hard to find this perfect line, the golden line between those two axes. But we found this, that to ensure effective policy in the area of AI, it's necessary to take context, sectors of application into account. So regarding the manufacturing, policies regarding application of AI on personal data should be allowed to differ from policies regarding application of AI on machine data, especially in certain application sectors, with clarity of the interdependence with GDPR, ensuring competition interests. General regulations or policy measures can be considered in regulation to algorithm transparency and explainability. In the sector of climate energy, the environmental impact of AI applications should become transparent and presenting the effects on the climate, together with efficiency and other targets, should become the standard to avoid these rebound effects. Smart cities, on the sector of smart cities, data collection by cities should be open for access to stimulate innovation. The same applies for certain data collected by private enterprises operating under the license by cities. And this is, of course, a topic by its own when it comes to urban data and what if it's open and free. Regulation should be adaptable and flexible, with minimizing the mitigating risks and ensuring human rights and European values. And I would like to give three points, three principles to contribute the increase of impact of AI. Privacy management supported by AI, an ecosystem overall transfer of data will be done with guaranteed GDPR compliance under auditing of the regulator. Counterfactual checks and algorithm explainability. Think of the health patient. They should be aware of how their data are used and understand the decision-making process. And of course, it was already mentioned, so I'm not going to spend more time, the sandbox-based regulation. That are my insights for this discussion, and I'm happy to discuss more with you in the discussion that follows. Thank you.
Okay, Orestes, many thanks for that. And finally, we'll hear from Carolina Rossini, co-founder, Chief Impact and Partnership Officer of the DataSphere Initiative and Professor of Law at Boston University. Carolina, you are very welcome.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for the organizers to support our remote participation today. So I'm sorry I couldn't be in Brussels with you today. So while Orestes and Boiana actually made my work much easier about when they talk about sandboxes and things has a holistic approach, which are core advocacy points for my organization, I still have some points to add to the discussion. So I want to make sure that if you remember anything from my presentation today, these are the three core points, which I think communicate well with what the other speakers have said. Clearly, we live in a moment where complex problems demand complex solutions. AI practices, this was my first point. The second point, AI practices and its associated processes of collecting and using data, clearly, also based on what the other speakers have said, generate social externalities that are highly consequential. And third point, thus, we really need to be extra careful in designing our data governance approaches to support these holistic solutions to complex problems, including AI, and understand, but break narrative silos that we face when we regulate in these spaces. But most importantly, and unfortunately, I haven't heard our speakers touching that, we should not leave anyone behind. We should not leave no one behind. We used to say that about connectivity, and I have been in this space for over 20 years, working also on internet connectivity issues. And now we should say the same for data governance and AI. We should not leave no one behind. So when the benefits are generated, we generate well-being and economic opportunities for all. So I think these are three very important elements. And when you do generate benefits to all and you don't leave anyone behind, folks tend to be more positive and trust more regulations and institutions, and also the private sector most generally, and their governments, right? I come originally from Brazil. I've been working in the U.S. and also I was based in Spain for a while. So I always try to bring a little bit of a global South perspective to these discussions, right? So regarding my first point, we live in a moment where complex systems demand complex solutions. I bring this exactly because of all the regulation that's coming up from Europe. And the European Union and Commission bear a very strong responsibility, because the rest of the world do look up to these bodies for examples of regulation. So there is a large domino effect, especially in Africa and Latin America, also because of all the heritage links, all the links we have culturally to this. So it's very interesting that after a lot of call for caution and criticisms, including by European countries, civil society, and more, that April 2021 EU 108 pages proposal to regulate AI, which was described as an attempt, right, to ensure a well-functioning internal market for artificial intelligence based on EU values and fundamental rights, is now moving, even with all these criticisms and call for caution, through the normal legislative process in the EU, right? And again, I want to call for this caution because there are a lot of issues around transparency and inclusion and bias. We're still not completely dealt with in this proposal. The proposal is now, as I mentioned, ready for its first reading in the Parliament, and will move through its normal legislative processes. So there are still potential moments there for amendment. So let's see how that's going to happen, right? What's going to happen there. But in addition to the AI Act, you also have the DSA, the Digital Service Act, the DGA, the Data Governance Act, and yet another act that's called the Data Act, right? And this is all on top of the GDPR. So it's very interesting to see so many acts around data treated so separately and also in different parallel processes, right? So the EU regulation and all these efforts, actually, they are not completely novel, right? AI specifically, for AI regulation specifically, the EU has followed some of the recommendations and paths and discussions, both from the OECD, from the G20, and from UNESCO. But all these efforts also bring different angles and address AI challenges from different angles. So there is a lot there to be considered when one uniform regulation comes into place. And I'm not sure we are there yet, right? So remember, I'm talking about point one of complex problems demand complex solutions. So, for example, recently during the G20 Rome Leaders Declaration on Privacy and Data Protection, during the G20 Rome Leaders Declaration, privacy and data protection did figure prominently in the 2021 G20 Leader Statement that just came not much over a year ago. And it came exactly because of the COVID implications, transport and travel concerns, and also digital economy and higher implications, data flow. It really brought a lot of things, even gender issues were there. And the goal here was towards enhancing confidence in the digital environment by improving internet safety and countering online abuse, hate speech, online violence, terrorism. It really felt like checking the box, right? And checking the box is a different approach than a complex approach, holistic approach, that you understand how those things are actually intertwined. While it's true that the European Union's institutions indeed have taken a global significant step with this proposal for the Artificial Intelligence Act, as I said, academics and human rights advocates have warned that these initiatives bring narrow safeguards that neglect how existing inequalities and failures to protect rights such as the digital divide, bias, social security cuts, especially in the EU, and discrimination in the labor market shape the design of automated systems. And they should not, and they cannot, right? Technology is neutral. The responsibility is behind of those is on those who are behind, who are developing that technology. And if we ensure a good data governance that is inclusive and deal with these concerns, we will be able to not leave no one behind and foster innovation and really support, for example, is small and medium enterprises, right? Because it's very easy when you are in a big company to absorb some of those costs. I worked for Facebook for some years, and it's much easier for Facebook than a startup in Brazil to absorb those costs, even if it's cost for everybody. But that we need to help those folks understanding this complexity and making it easier for application. The same thing, right? The same critics also, and there is a letter with hundreds of signatures from civil society and academics, also from the US, regarding the data regulation efforts via the DSA and other upcoming ones, where they have alerted to elements of data flow restriction, including the expansion of IP rights like trade secrets to data. And that's not helpful when you try to solve problems like climate change or epidemic issues, right? So we have to be very careful on expanding IP rights to data, to really understand the chilling effects of those constraints on innovation, especially by SMEs, actually, right? Regarding my second point, right, AI practice and its associated processes of collecting and using data generate social externalities that are highly consequential, right? This is my second point, again, repeating so we all remember it. So this siloed approach that we've seen in these different regulatory approaches and proposed solutions generate long-term risks to various populations that those acts should actually protect and support. Because of AI practice and its associated process of collecting and using data, they generate normally and intrinsically these social externalities that are highly consequential for people to whom those data relate. Such social externalities cannot, in principle, be addressed through proposals for conducting AI more rigorously and fairly, right? It needs to go deeper. It needs to go to the data governance itself, as Orestes was also mentioning. So, for instance, right, some of those externalities. The former UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights warned against the use of high-tech tools to deny or limit access to life-saving benefits and other social services. So during COVID, for example, there were a lot of barriers for international organizations like the UNHCR, which deals with refugee situations, to actually share small payments and small funding to refugees because of a lot of how the AI and the data was being processed about those refugees, for example. The same risks are also being documented of these externalities in the global south, in Africa, for example, where digital ID efforts, right, challenge local cultural identity practices and people are being left behind. So we need to make an extra effort to not leave people behind. And that's my last point, right? We need to be extra careful, and I repeat, in designing our data governance approaches to support holistic solutions to complex problems. Data is reshaping, obviously, the way we produce, consume, and live, and that's happening now. It's funny when we still read that data will change our life in 21st century. It already started changing it for a couple of decades, and benefits and challenges will be felt in every single aspect of our life, ranging from more conscious energy consumption, like actually Boyana was giving an example of her carbon use and flights, to material and food traceability, to healthier lives and better healthcare, right? We need to share data to enable innovation, but to share data, we have to think about the data value chain to have good data governance, and good data governance means also not leaving anybody behind. And this approach to capture, and just for example, right, the EU does refer to data as the lifeblood of economic development. So that's how intrinsic data is to all of us. Anyway, to this approach and to capture the understanding about data and consequently data governance, we actually have published a report called We Need to Talk About Data. And it was interesting that Orestes actually said exactly that phrase. So if you check our website, thedatasphere.org, you're going to see our report that we published back in April this year. So in this report, we concluded that the narratives and analogies that we have at our disposal are incredibly limiting. They are polarizing and quite frankly dystopic, right? So you have privacy advocates versus platforms. You have sovereign versus flow. And we should understand those silos and actually see some of them are trying to solve the same problems. So how can we bring what's common together so we work on all of this together? I really recommend the report. It brings a lot of the interesting analogies. There is even an analogy that data is like avocado because it has a shell life. But anyway, so in our world that we are all starting to bury our heads in the metaverse, even before solving the issues of the real world, and one where we see persistent mistrust between governments and growth in unilateral measurements, right? You see, for example, a steep increase in data localizations laws around the world. And this cannot only be our options. We need better narratives. We need more holistic narratives. And the UNCTAD 2021 Digital Economy Report, which I do recommend and was launched recently, raises a very similar point that we need reframing for this holistic, more complex view. But the siloed approach, don't worry, I don't want to be overly critical to the EU, is actually found everywhere in the world, right? We are conducting and finalizing a benchmark of the data governance ecosystem, and we have already mapped over 200 organizations on this issue, over 50 models of data governance frameworks, and dozens of principles, and beyond a multitude of legal approaches, also from different international organizations from all over the world, covering multiple sectors and types of data, both personal and non-personal. So we also have to break a little bit that dichotomy, right? And because of all of this, we think building the concept of the data sphere can be very useful to understand this space that we are immersed in and we are co-building. I don't want to go further. I think we don't have a lot of time, but to finalize, I really want to invite you guys to come and join our efforts of the data sphere. We are building a large network of high-level organizations and institutions and individuals, and we really are coming together to fill this institutional vacuum and experiment with safe environments. It's awesome to hear everybody talking about sandboxes. We've been pushing for this idea of sandboxes for a while, and we are starting to work with some South Asian countries in this idea too. And we need to embrace diversity, right, to drive innovation. And this is our focus at the Data Sphere Initiative. Thank you so much to the moderator and my fellow panelists.
Carolina, thank you so much for that. And that concludes our first session. So I want to thank our panelists, Lorenzo Pupillo, Daniel Luvinic, Boyana Bellamy, Orestes Trasanidis, and indeed again, Carolina Rossini. We will now